All right, let's get started on this. So I'd like to introduce everybody today. Thank you for joining us. This is Hemp for Victory. My name is Robert Head. I am the chair for Hemp for Victory. Our focus at Hemp for Victory is education. We want to educate our leaderships in the military, industries, and in government about how cannabis is positively affecting our veterans community. And with us today, and I would like to also thank Weed Maps and Weed Map Policy for helping us put this on. Today's discussion is going to revolve around President Biden's comments on pardons and rescheduling and or descheduling marijuana. I'd also like to throw out a thank you to Tan and Kate O'Hara, who helped promote this event to allow us to get our attendees and panelists together. We'd like to send out a shout out to ESG and Weed Maps. We really appreciate you guys helping us out with this. I'd like to introduce some of our subject matter experts who will help us discuss this today. This is a very important topic. When we talk about rescheduling and we talk about pardons and how they affect the military and how they affect veterans, I want to keep everybody a couple of statistics in mind. One main statistic I really want you to keep in mind is the fact that veterans are 60% more likely to use cannabis over the general public. So as we go through this discussion, keep in mind that the majority of veterans are really subject to these outdated laws and the consequences of them. We'll find out really quickly about how this can change and how complicated it actually is. Today, I'd like to introduce some of our subject matter experts. Todd Scatini, he's here. And we have, first of all, I'd like to do, Todd, I'm going to hand it over to you for about 15 to 30 seconds. Give them a breakdown of who you are, what you've done, things of that nature, and then we'll move on from there.
Sure, thanks. My name is Todd Scatini. I'm a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. I served for 27 years, retired about 5 years ago to start a company called Harvest 360. So we write licenses and applications for people to enter the cannabis industry across the country. But I spent a lot of my time doing activism. I helped legalize medical cannabis in the state of Missouri, where I live, in Kansas City. And I try to bring attention for the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration about the potential that cannabis has, right? I talk a lot about the paradigm shift of cannabis-free legalization and try to direct the Department of Defense and VA to grasp this as an opportunity to save the lives of those who have served in the military and those who are serving. I think I'm a co-founder of the Hemp for Victory Foundation. This whole thing kind of came off the back of an event that we had 1 year ago, almost exactly, in Dallas, Texas, where we had about 350 active duty and veterans that joined us for the conversation. And I'm really proud to be here. I think it's a great opportunity. Hemp for Victory for me is the ability to intersect military leadership and cannabis knowledge and expertise anywhere that we can, either virtually or in person and on a repeated basis, because I think this is a conversation that is going to continue to evolve. So excited about today's conversation.
So very true. So very true. Our next subject matter expert is Shane Pennington. He was our legal advisor to our beloved Sue Sisley, Dr. Sue Sisley, who did a great deal of research and recently had a publication for it. Shane, would you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Hi to all the other panelists. I don't have a military background. I tried to go into the Marine ROTC program out of college, but it turned out I have a bunch of bizarre things when you look closely at my body, like bones that haven't welded together and my heart's in the wrong place. Not in the proverbial way, but in the actually physically my heart isn't where it's supposed to be, which prevented me from being in the military. So anyway, I'm a lawyer. I'm from Houston, Texas originally, and clerked for a bunch of federal judges, went to a big law firm, worked in the Supreme Court practice there until I met Dr. Sisley. And it was through her efforts to get a license to grow her own cannabis for research rather than studying, the government grown marijuana that isn't like anything that anyone studies. That I became familiar with the issues and the veterans' rights angle on all of this, and quit my job at the corporate law firm and came and did impact litigation in the cannabis space full time. And that's where I've been ever since. And along the way, I moved my family from Houston to Beacon, New York, in the Hudson Valley. That's where I am now.
Outstanding. Thank you, Shane, for coming in here and doing this with us. I appreciate it. Also like to talk to Dr. Curry Myers. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Appreciate the invitation.
Thank you, sir, for showing up for this. I
I'm
appreciate
retired
it.
sheriff of Johnson County, Kansas, which is here in the Kansas City metropolitan area. It's one of the larger sheriff's offices in the Midwest. Prior to that, I was a state trooper and then served in the Kansas Bureau of Investigation for the vast majority of my 24-year career. Worked everything from undercover, was assigned to DEA task force for 5 years, homicides, public corruption, police corruption. Retired from law enforcement. When I was on the job, I went back and got my doctorate as well as my MBA. So I've been on faculty at colleges for the last 12 years. I've been at Benedictine College now for 12 years, teaching in the criminology department. And I have a company called Green Canopy Consulting, which is dedicated to the cannabis industry, where I focus on security and compliance consulting. Also helped with applications. And like Todd, I have also testified across the United States with respect to medical marijuana. I serve as a public justice advisor to Americans for Prosperity. In working with them, I've worked again across the country on criminal justice, public policy issues, which include cannabis as well. So honored to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, sir. It's good to have you here. Let's get started on this. Biden wants to pardon all federal prior offenses of simple possession of marijuana. The difference between federal and state offenses when it comes to marijuana, what are the big differences, right? And most of the time when he says this, we're talking maybe 6,000 people. So really what it was just a nod to that this should be done. Really didn't do much, did it? Dr. Myers?
It didn't do anything at all, to be honest with you. It was more window dressing. The vast majority of cannabis offenses in the federal system are a result of plea bargains. They're not originally sentenced because for possession of marijuana. They were arrested for some other drug case. It could have been smuggling. It could have been possession with intent to sell larger amounts. And ultimately, in order to get a conviction, which is not uncommon in most courts, somewhere in the neighborhood of 92% of cases end up being pled out, especially at the federal level. When it's pled out, then you generally get a reduced sentence if you testify on behalf of the government. And the vast majority of these cases are with respect to plea bargains that have occurred. So really, I'm not saying that it doesn't start a discussion for better cannabis public policy down the road, but in reality, the pardon really didn't have any major effect. And I don't think there was anybody in prison at the time this occurred for simple possession of cannabis, at least at the federal level.
So I looked at some stats, and majority of people that are actually in jail are from state issued laws. So when I looked at it, the arrests that were made were about 170,000 for marijuana possession, only 14,000 for marijuana sales. I think that was in 2021. And my question is the pardons don't really do anything for the arrest. They only do for it if you're convicted, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So, and I would say the same thing occurs at the state level. A lot of those cases are pleas. So when you go in for the state level, it may have a large number of convictions for possession of marijuana, but once again, these are being pled down. Now, to give you an example, most of the states that offend the most are Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, and I think Louisiana is the last one. They had significant numbers up until 2017, but as far as this year, those numbers have been reduced significantly. So even the states that concentrated the most on cannabis possession arrest have declined completely. And if you look at the states that have passed some form of legal marijuana, a lot of those pardons have occurred. The governors there's been either some sort of decrim associated with it or pardons associated with it. So it's nearly not the impact that it could have had 10 years ago. I'm glad we're moving in the right direction. I think law enforcement should still focus on illegal activity. We want to make sure that we have follow a legal market that has quality control standards, compliance, all those kinds of things, and let law enforcement focus on the illicit market, because we don't want to have black market. I think ultimately the biggest issue is we don't want the overregulation and overtaxed. And if we do that, then we're going to drive the black market. So the federal government and the states, if they pass it, individual states have to recognize that their public policy on this could actually drive the black market if they're not careful.
I'm going to circle back to that here in a minute, because that's very important. It's actually on my notes to discuss. But one thing I want to talk about real quick before we go there is, what are the social effects from being arrested? When you see, if you've arrested somebody and they've gone to jail for marijuana and you put them back out on the street, you wind up seeing them again. What are these social effects that you see from just a general public? And then Todd, I'd like you to chime in on what the social effects really are for veterans or people in the military when they get caught with it.
Well, I think it mainly affects people when they're looking for employment. I don't think there's that much of a stigma again compared to, we've come leaps and bounds from 20 years ago, my friends. It's, when you look at the fact that we've had medical marijuana since, I think 1996 is when California first passed, and we've had more and more research. We now have incredible research showing the medical efficacy of cannabis to be used. As a result of that research, I think there's less stigma. The biggest problem is when you could have a criminal history when you're getting jobs, and in the federal, if you have a job that has certain security requirements like a CDL driver, things like that, you cannot consume cannabis at all. First responders can't consume cannabis at all. So the question becomes, at some point, if we want to consider this medically efficient and available for folks, should everybody be able to get this, as opposed to some not being able to get it because of the type of job that they have?
It's a good point. That's a very good point. Todd, can you chime in on the military aspect of it?
Yeah, sure. But I do want to comment on that really quickly. I think a big key to this is getting first responders access, right? We should not be limiting people's employment opportunities because of cannabis, especially in states where it is legal medically. We saw New York Fire Department already made a statement on that. They're no longer testing for THC. Then the New York Police Department stopped testing for about an hour. And then they came back and said, no, we forgot. We're going to keep this up. I grew up in a law enforcement house, so I have huge respect for the sheriffs. I think the key to helping this move forward is allow the law enforcement, especially, to be able to consume cannabis, because they deal with a lot of the same issues that we do in the military with post-traumatic stress, as well as a lot of the pain and issues that are created from all of the equipment that they carry around with them. But from the military aspect, I don't know that this is going to have too much of an implication, except for I will say that when a veteran gets thrown in jail for something and in prison, there's a good potential that they will lose any sort of retirement pay that they have coming to them, potentially disability pay. I'm not positive on the disability, but the retirement pay and other rights that they've earned could be lost by that. But bottom line, I think the whole thing is just an indication that we recognize that no humans should be in a cage for a plant that has never killed anyone and is, what the DEA once classified as the most therapeutically active plant that has ever existed. And I agree with that. So I think we are moving in the right direction. The trick is, to get the VA and the DOD to start talking about this from a larger perspective of what it could mean for those who have served, and in the future for those who are serving, right? Because it's not unheard of. We're doing this. This is already happening in Canada and will soon happen in countries like Germany. So I think we're on a good path.
Dr. Myers, you wrote that in California, 75% of the cannabis market is licensed by unlicensed dealers. Would you say that's the case for the rest of the country that has legal markets like California?
No, I wouldn't say, and I don't claim to be an expert in everybody's individual markets in each state, but California, Oregon, Washington in particular have more of an illicit market than others. And I think it goes back to when they introduced it, they introduced bad public policy associated with it. They didn't think about the unintended consequences of high regulations and high taxes. They have, incredible excise taxes. Everybody gets to take a bite out of it, the city, county, the state. That's what concerns me most about the federal government. I think the federal government should stay out of it. I think they should decrim and let the states determine. That's the reason I'm a supporter of Nancy Mace's act, who's a Republican out of South Carolina, and I think she has the best bill of all the feds. But those states in particular, and we don't want to do what Oklahoma did, which went total libertarian and said we're going to have very few standards, and they gave out a lot of licenses, and they don't have hardly any compliance, quite frankly. So I think their legislature is reexamining that. I really believe, I love the principles of federalism, and it's taken a place. It's really occurring with respect to cannabis policy, is let the states decide. States are going to figure out what's working best for them. And then other states are going to emulate and say, you know what, this state's doing it right. Let's be closer to them. This state's got it completely wrong. We don't want to follow that. And at some point, you come up with pretty good public policy. I'm not saying that there's not, people don't abuse things. So I think we need to understand something significant here. Everybody could abuse something, so if you take more of something than what you should, that could be a problem for people. We want to make sure that people aren't driving under the influence, those kinds of things. Open containers, there's more popular. I know in Missouri, drinks are extremely popular now, so there's got to be same limitations on open containers. But I think we can live in the same space. Law enforcement, I think the Overton window is closed on this topic. I think it's time to move on and focus on good public policy and try to help the other states, like my Kansas, where I live and where Colonel Scatini lives, is that, we want to make sure that Kansas and other states pass something that at least can get medical marijuana to those that can take it. I think the biggest issue, if I could say briefly, is THC stays in your system longer than any other drug. It's anywhere from 28 to 30 days. And that's the big problem. It's if you get stopped for a DUI and you test somebody for marijuana, that doesn't mean you're intoxicated just because it comes back and says that you have THC in your system. You could have smoked that 2 weeks ago and been away from it. So we're going to have more drug recognition experts on law enforcement so they don't make the mistake of over relying on drug testing to show that somebody's done. I did a very significant study on this on my Substack, drcurrymyers.substack.com. The same things that are done with motor skills on traffic stops, law enforcement can use the same kind of motor skill testing and things like that for people to tell people if they're under the influence of cannabis. So we just need to train our officers more, and we don't right now have a BAC for this kind of drug. I think at some point the technology is going to catch up, and we will. But that's the biggest problem, I think, is the fact that THC remains in your system for significant periods of time.
And we aren't quite, we don't have the regulations and the policies set into place to be able to govern it that way.
Correct.
In that regards.
Yep.
So a question for Todd and the question for Shane. How can this affect an active duty soldier? You have an active duty soldier that's stationed in Colorado. He's married, has a wife who has nothing to do with the military and the fact that she's a wife. They live off post. He's now subject to UCMJ, the federal and the state law. She's only subjected to the state law. And only the federal law, she goes on to post. How could this pardon have worked better? That's really going to be the question for Shane. But for Todd, what kind of issues are these people looking at in states where it's legal, especially for some of these veterans who've been in for more than 5 years and are now experiencing that 5-jump chump knees problem with their knees and everything else?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I mean, I don't think it has much to do with the expungement or pardoning aspect of it, but it has everything to do with readiness in the military, right? I mean, today there are people who are serving who are trying, they're trying to make a decision on whether or not they're going to continue to serve and they're looking at whether or not they're going to have to, continue to use opioids or antipsychotics or anything else that they may be prescribed while on active duty, or if they could potentially have access to medical cannabis, right? Because it's no secret that this is working for things that are really affecting the veteran community: chronic pain, post-traumatic stress issues, anxiety, depression, insomnia, all of that. And so I think people in uniform are considering, whether or not they're going to continue to serve or have access to that. Or, for example, if they have a child or a spouse who has a condition that could be addressed very well by cannabis, such as Dravet syndrome, intractable epilepsy, or Crohn's disease, or things of that nature. And you have to decide whether or not you're going to get your spouse or your child access to medical cannabis, or you're going to continue to serve the country. And I think that's a really bad decision to have to make. And simultaneously, I would say that there are young men and women who are standing out in front of recruiting offices today who are, who have known nothing but legal cannabis in their state. Think about a young California kid like me back in the day, who's like, well, so you're telling me in order to serve my country, I won't have access to a medicine that is helping, treat my grandmother's glaucoma, or helps my mom sleep, or my dad get through his cancer treatments. And instead, they're seeing the number of veterans who are coming out with serious addictions to opioids, use of SSRIs and other antipsychotics to treat post-traumatic stress. And so it comes into the decision-making process for them, for sure. I guess the one way that this could work, the one way that this could work, if there are expungements that are taking place for simple possession, if someone is, of service age, but they got a possession charge around 19, 20, 21, and they can get that expunged, then they would have the ability to serve their nation. But again, they wouldn't be able to consume cannabis. They won't even be able to consume hemp milk, if you can believe that. That's the current policy in the Department of Defense. Like they can't even sell hemp milk or hemp seed in our commissaries because they don't want people to have plausible deniability.
That is true. Shane, I have a question for you. Is there anything that the executive branch could have done to help with people who have been maybe arrested and it was on their record, but they never went to jail for it? Or could there maybe people who were trying to get into the military that had it on their record? Could there have been anything that the executive branch could have done to change that?
Sure. I mean, in the military context, the president being the commander in chief and the head of the entire executive branch, with direct hiring, firing power over every political appointee in the executive branch, including in the VA, the Department of Defense, all the way down. I mean, you're talking about the boss of the boss of the boss. The buck stops there. If he wants to go tell the VA to change its priorities, he could go do that today, and they would either listen or they work at his pleasure. And so he could do a lot. And I mean, just specifically, if he, as far as expungements go, I'm not sure that he could just do that by executive order. The pardon power is a different thing than an expungement power. And there are actually statutory limits on expungements generally at the federal level. And then I think it's even more complicated when you get into the military context. I think that if the president does decide to address the military issue, he's in a uniquely powerful position there because of his unique role as the commander in chief to resolve some of those problems. And I hasten to add that if he doesn't, then there are a lot of legislative fixes or administrative fixes that might address other aspects of this very complicated problem that will remain unaddressed unless other action is taken. So, for example, if you were to deschedule cannabis, for example, right, which, I wouldn't hold your breath, but if you did, if that were to happen at the federal level, it wouldn't change, 18 USC 922 D and G, which make it, impossible for folks with a medical marijuana card to go get a firearm in this country, including veterans and the spouses of veterans who are back, trying to defend their homes on their own while a service member is abroad, for example, those folks can't get medical marijuana even in a legal state under federal law. And just descheduling cannabis doesn't automatically change that statute, right? And if you just go into the U.S. code and control F, marijuana with an H and a J, and you cover all your bases, you'll find that it's littered throughout it's not just the Controlled Substances Act that we're talking about. I mean, this is a deeply rooted issue that traces through the entire federal system. And so, we need to be vigilant. Groups like this are very important because they can, sort of spot those things and be prepared to mobilize whatever happens, in the political races in Congress and from the president.
So let's talk about that right now. We'll move on from the pardons. I think we've beaten a dead horse on that. Biden asked the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Attorney General to initiate an administrative process to review expeditiously how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. What power do these offices hold when it comes to placing certain schedules or putting things on a scheduling list? What kind of powers do they actually hold to do this? Or are they just recommendations to the president?
No, the president doesn't have the power unilaterally to do anything with scheduling. He can do what he did, just like you or I could. We can request that the Attorney General initiate the process. That's 21 USC 811. And that's what the president did. He said to do it expeditiously. Perhaps he's aware that it generally takes an average of 9.5 years to do this in this sort of scheduling process with any substance. With cannabis, it's even longer. I mean, the most famous one is a 22-year ordeal that NORML instituted beginning in 1972, right after the Controlled Substances Act was signed into law. And it took until whatever it was, 1987, I think, before that one was actually finally through with judicial review. And they just kept it in Schedule 1, by the way. So
yeah.
Well,
so they have all of the power. The only entity that has power other than DEA and HHS on this is Congress.
So Congress would have to pass a law taking certain powers away from the DEA and HHC or Health and Human Services in order to fix a lot of these problems. So it sounds like we got too many hands in a cookie jar.
There are a couple of ways. So the first way is the Attorney General, through a process that involves HHS and specifically FDA. That's the first way, and that's the normal way. That's the way that's provided in the Controlled Substances Act now. The only other way is legislative. The president can do a lot of things, but when there's a statute that says, here's the process you use, the president can't jump across the separation of powers divide, take the power that Congress, used through the democratic process and say, to hell with that, I'm going to do it my way. He just doesn't have that power. And so there are only two ways. It's through that administrative process that Biden has requested that the Attorney General initiate, or legislation.
Todd, you had something?
Yeah, I wanted to say that, it's because of the way that we approve drugs, like the way medicine gets approved today, and this FDA process, because we've, in the medical community and scientific community, we've fallen in love with single molecules that we can test over a 10-year period and spend billions of dollars doing so. And then another, you own the patent on that single molecule for another 10, 15 years, and they spend billions of dollars for that. And I think, the medical community is a little bit freaked out and a little bit overwhelmed by the fact that this is a plant that has, hundreds of molecules and cannabinoids and terpenes that operate on a system, the endocannabinoid system, that they really have only been teaching about in medical schools very rarely, but up until recently a little bit more. And so I think the system has to change a little bit. And the FDA and HHS, they're so used to this system that it's going to be very hard to wrest it from their hands. And as Shane mentioned, the prohibition of cannabis is really like just interlaced into policies across so many levels in the United States, and our ability to do anything as an individual citizen. It's going to take a long time to unravel it. It's amazing for me to think that 85 years of prohibition have led to this. People are so triggered by cannabis that they can't even think straight sometimes when, but the one voice I think that kind of brings them back to reality is the veteran voice. And that's why I'm so proud to be a part of conversations like this, right? Because the veteran community runs through the HHS and through DEA and FDA and through all of these different levels of government. And everyone can look around and go, well, weed's bad, but we should let the veterans use it at least, right? And I also want to comment on one other thing that you mentioned, Shane, is that, the VA, in terms of like opening up research, which hopefully a descheduling or a lowering of the schedule will do, is the ideal platform upon which to conduct such research, right? This is an institution that has the largest patient population in the country with 9 million patients. They have 150 VA hospitals across the entire United States and all of the territories, with 1,200 VA clinics across the country. And many of those clearly are overlaid over these 37 states now that have medical cannabis programs.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Myers,
I would also, may I just add an international side too, right? Because like the VA also has research relationships with international, with other countries. And we should be looking very closely towards Canada, whose VA has been providing medical cannabis for their veterans for several years now. We should be learning and informing our future decisions based on that, I think.
I think it's true too. I've talked to them up there. They got a great program. Dr. Myers, you mentioned a term called over-criminalization in one of your articles. Would you call the use of marijuana as the statutes they put on it, even from not only just from state level, all the way into treaties that we have with Canada and Jamaica and everything else, would you call this over-criminalization of a plan?
It is now. I think as through anything, time changes, and we learn, and we are able to study something more than what we were before. By and large, I think we're seeing the decriminalization come to us slowly. In fact, I wish other federal criminal statutes would move along with this cannabis issue. There's over 5,000 federal criminal statutes now that our founding fathers would have never agreed to if they came back in time. There was only a couple. There was the U.S. Postal Service inspectors, there was the U.S. Marshal Service and Customs. Those were the three main federal law enforcement agencies when our founding fathers started this country. And now we have, for every agency, every federal agency in America, we have what's called 1811 law enforcement agents, which means that they have the authority to arrest people in general. So what we've seen is the criminalization of regulations, as opposed to just what we think is normal law. And so EPA, even Department of Transportation, I mean, you can go down the entire list of all the different agencies that have law enforcement authority and act on it. And one of the biggest ones I'm concerned about, if the federal government does decide to get out of it and approve it, will be OSHA. I think OSHA is going to dedicate some time and effort into our industry. They're going to look at facilities, especially that are manufacturing and cultivation facilities. And OSHA is one of the few federal agencies that has a actual responsibility where they have to have a certain number per year of fees that are brought in. And I think we'll have OSHA inspectors visiting a lot of our legal cannabis locations as soon as the feds will allow them to. And we're going to, you could potentially see very large fines for those. So I'm trying to educate my clients now on following certain standards so they don't get caught up in that when it does occur.
And if I could add on to that, I mean, I completely agree. I have my tinfoil hat back here somewhere. I just usually don't wear it when I'm being live streamed, but in all seriousness, I mean, I completely agree. And I'd just like to follow through with that just a little bit. Let's say, so, I mean, Dr. Myers has made several really important points and they connect up. And if you follow through with them a little bit further, you can really, the behemoth comes into full view, I think. So the first point that he made was, listen, you tax it a lot, you facilitate and you nurture and incubate the black market, which actually ironically would mean if you do that, if legalization comes with extraordinarily high taxes, then all it really does is promote illegal activity, which is bizarre and absurd and also predictable and absolutely going to happen, just like he described. I mean, I'm not an economist, but just go ask any economist or think about it for yourself for a minute, right? Then the second point that he made that's very important is he's pointing out some of the regulations. And I mean, he's picking low-hanging fruit, both because he doesn't have time to go through the list, I'm sure, and because none of us even know them all. I mean, there's so much you can't even imagine. Like the reason that the cannabis industry, it's just such a unique experiment because it's grown up under the state laws with this overhang of federal illegality hanging over its head. It's gotten so big that the feds literally don't have the resources to regulate it. But once they step in to tax it, they're also eventually going to regulate it. And regulation means compliance. And compliance costs money. And I'm talking about a lot of money. If you look at what it costs to comply with the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act under federal law, you will soon find that your bottom line as a business, is going to take a major hit. I mean, you're going to have to hire all new lawyers. And here's the point. Once you do that, you then have to get that money from somewhere. So you either raise your prices, right, which then makes it easier for the black market sellers to undercut your prices. You see what I'm saying? This is basic economics, right? Or you just go out of business. So we need to think very hard. I mean, it really is this simple. We need to think about what legalization is going to look like, how it's going to break down. And normally the way that the feds enforce and get these regulations done and implemented is through some form of either user fees in like the FDA case or conditional spending, where they basically hire the state law enforcement. And I'm sure this is what Dr. Myers was doing in his prior life, right? You were working with DEA because DEA frankly doesn't have the resources itself. So it has to go to the local people, get them to do the dirty work for them. But the issue is going to be whether the states would even go along with such a scheme if it means giving up all of their, tax piggy banks that they're getting from the legal markets now. This is a complicated problem, and people who care can't sit on the sidelines. If you don't roll up your sleeves and figure out how to make it work, nobody is going to do it for us. So very important conversation. Totally agree with everything he's saying, and hope I'm not putting words in his mouth.
No, and it really concerned me at the federal level because people need to. Sometimes I see a lot of things on LinkedIn where the Congress or the Senate is thinking about passing an act, and I see people in the cannabis industry championing that, and they need to understand the unintended consequences of what kind of bills come before the Senate. Just because it's pro-cannabis does not mean it's going to be pro-cannabis. That's the reason we need to have a very laissez-faire type. Again, I brought up Nancy Mace's act. Please do research on that act. It basically has decrim. It turns it over to the states. FDA does not have anything to do with cannabis when it comes to her act. It'll be similar to alcohol. We want it. Hey, I'm a Scotch drinker. I want to go to the place and buy a Scotch and be able to drink it and not go blind and have standards and quality assurance and all that kind of stuff. We want our cannabis to be to have standards, quality assurance, compliance, and all those kinds of things to make sure it's the best product. And right now we're over pharmacating our entire population. I just read today we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 37% of the Gen Zers are on some sort of psychotropic medicine. In jails, as a sheriff, we had about 60% of our inmates were on psychotropic medicine. If you look at veterans, they have significant war injuries, they're suffering from PTSD. And what do? We get them addicted to opioids, and they don't have any other opportunity. And cannabis is a perfect example to try to weed people off of these pharmaceutical drugs. But the pharmaceutical industries have a huge market. So
it is definitely,
is America's
from what I'm
exit drug.
hearing, I wanted to interject real quick. From what I'm hearing, when it comes to the pardons, it really didn't do much. When it comes to the descheduling and rescheduling, that process may take a decade to get done. When it comes to research, right? So right now we're in an issue where when they're complaining about not having enough research when there's more than enough research all around outside of the United States. But the research that they would like to see is here in the United States, and we can't seem to do that. We're kind of on a two-bladed sword here, right? What can we do? Will decriminalization at all help out when it comes to research for the VA and things of that nature? Can Biden make an adjustment to the VA directly, allowing for research?
I'd like
Because
to
this could take
take this
so
one if I
Yeah,
could I take this one?
yeah, go right
Yeah,
ahead,
okay.
bro.
This is my passion of all the different things that are you can get upset about. The fact that we're in a scientific dark age on something that millions of Americans are using, is immoral. I mean, so putting my tinfoil hat away and getting my moral preacher book out, like it really is. And let me explain why it is. Okay. If the federal government is correct that this stuff is so dangerous, it has to be locked away in Schedule 1. And if you dare touch it, you need to have this, $10,000 to $50,000 safe, and we have to have fences around you and all these record keeping requirements because it's so outrageously dangerous, right? But then they're going to turn a blind eye to the fact that millions of Americans are using it all across the country, right? And they're not going to let these scientists do the research to find out and actually know. So if that is in fact the case, then our elected officials have kind of a moral duty to enforce the law, right? If it's not, and it actually could be useful, that research would tell us how, under what circumstances, and then they could facilitate getting it to people, like maybe the 17 veterans who are committing suicide each day, right? Maybe they might have been able to benefit if they were using these things instead of getting addicted to opioids, for example. And again, that's a moral imperative. And I'm not a moralizer. My dad's a preacher, a Methodist preacher. I am not. I chose to do something different. It is very rare for me to get up on my moral high horse. I'm on it. This is my moral high horse. This is outrageous. Second point, the reason that this is happening and the reason it's complicated is because of the model that Todd was talking about earlier. That pharmaceutical model, it works like this. The research that we require to get drugs to market are called randomized clinical trials, usually placebo-controlled in 3 phases. Bottom line is, to get them done, it costs between usually $100 million to $1 billion for a single drug. And he's right that it usually focuses on a single molecule. Now, why would anybody pay? I don't know if you guys got $1 billion to pay to prove cannabis is safe when everybody's already using it. Like, I don't. And it turns out nobody the reason that people normally are ready to pony up that money is because they are pharmaceutical companies who get certain things on the back end because of that investment. They get temporary market exclusivity. Okay, that means that when they get a drug through that process, they get a monopoly on it and they get to sell it for years and nobody else can get it. So they get to reap all the profits from bringing this brand new cure to the market. That's the first thing. Then on the back end, they get patent rights and other intellectual property that they then get to protect their piggy bank. And that justifies for them. That gives them the incentive to go do that research. Okay, well, guess what? None of those incentives work for cannabis. It's already on the market. No one's going to pay to get market exclusivity. That can't possibly happen. You understand? That's why the pharmaceutical companies aren't going to pay for it. Okay. And then even if you did get it to market, you wouldn't be able to get the patent rights on it. I mean, maybe there's going to be some, but it's not going to be like with a synthetic molecule. This is incredibly important to understand. When you see people talking about that they're going to open up research and we're going to move it to Schedule 2. Sue Sisley wanted to do the research. We fought DEA and won 4 times to be able to get her to be able to have a license to grow and go do the research. There's no money. No one's paying her to do that research. There's not a problem of people not being able to do it. The problem is money because the model is broken. Okay. And so the last point that I have to make on this, and I'll shut up. I told you it's my moral high horse. This is the last point. The last point is in 1982, the FDA released it's called a drug bulletin. It was this like little guidance document that they sent around to all the folks who worked with the FDA. And they said they were commenting on DEA's 5-part test for currently accepted medical use that Todd was also referring to earlier. That's now basically FDA approval, okay? And through this process for interstate marketing. And they were saying like, listen, yeah, if we approve it for interstate marketing through randomized clinical trials, sure, that proves currently accepted medical use. They go, but theoretically, there could be other ways. Like, for example, if states started accepting something for medical use. If enough states accepted something for medical use, eventually, I guess you'd have to admit that it has medical use. You know why? Because the states are the authorities under our federal system over the practice of medicine. That's Gonzalez v. Oregon, an assisted suicide case that you might remember from back when, right? That is what has happened with cannabis. But since then, they've been hijacked by this DEA standard that requires FDA approval. And that has locked us into this model that will never approve cannabis for medical use, the plant. You'll get Epidiolex, you'll get Marinol, you'll get those molecules by a pharma company, and understand that once you do, they get market exclusivity, which means nobody else gets to sell them, even if they wanted to. So what we're all talking about, the cannabis, the flower that we're talking about, is not even part of the conversation under the federal model. Everybody needs to understand this. And you know who doesn't get it? Congress, Chuck Grassley, even the folks who want, and I'm a Chuck Grassley fan on many levels, but not on this one. And it's not because he's hearted in the right place. It's because he doesn't understand this reality about the drug approval system.
How do you dismantle such a complex problem? Because the fact that this complex system is in place, it's starting to seem like we are just fuel for the machine. As we kind of come in, the machine takes and uses us, discards us. We come in, machine takes us and uses us and discards us. And it may be me putting on a tinfoil hat like you are. You guys keep creating these wars so you can produce more veterans, and these veterans are getting pills left and right. I got no problem getting pills, right? But I also don't have a problem getting weed in Texas either, because it's the black market is everywhere. And like you said, it's
you'd have no problem
Everybody's
getting
using
thrown
it.
in jail in Texas. That's for sure.
You definitely can get
That's
thrown in
the
jail in
sad thing.
Texas.
You'd just be another veteran with a record after that, and it's so sad. You ask, what does it take, man? How do you dismantle this? One, it's going to take patience. Two, and most importantly, it's going to take leadership, and it takes vision, and it takes constructing for the federal government the project or the opportunity, really like educating them and sparking and capturing their imagination, right? Clearly, I mean, that's it. Maybe that's tinfoil hat too, but I don't think so. I think that we have been visionary leaders in this country since our inception, right? Only recently have we allowed it to really get encrusted with greed and with the misunderstanding of cannabis, and created a system and a model around that. I think we have to paint the opportunity, show the opportunity that there is around cannabis, and it's within the veteran community and eventually the active duty community. I think that this could really take root. Right. This is a project that everyone can get behind. Medical cannabis for veterans really crosses both the aisles. It crosses so many generations. It crosses the interagency, right? All of the alphabet soup that runs the government. That the veteran voice is all throughout there. And I can't tell you, one of the things that's really interesting to me, and sorry to go on a quick aside here, but there's a readiness issue within the federal government as well. And by that, I mean that I have spoken to so many people who are working for, you name your acronymed organization, right? DOS, the Department of State, the Department of Defense for sure. I mean, FBI, CIA, DEA, everyone. I can't tell you how many people have said, you know what, I cannot wait until I can retire from this job and I can try cannabis, because I can see how it's impacting people's lives positively. And that's not the type of employees that anyone wants in their organization, right? They are there only because they're trying to get to that retirement check. Of course, many people are inspired to a lifetime of service to the nation. Of course they are, but there are people who want to get out of federal government service so that they can use just CBD. Hell, I mean, if you're a government civilian, you can't even use CBD right now, and because there's certain residual THC within there. You will lose your job. And again, people are choosing between a safe, effective medicine and employment, or a safe, effective medicine and housing, or education, or you name your thing that should be normal for everyone to have.
So last point that we're going to make before we start winding down, we're coming up on an hour. The United States Army is 50% down in recruiting. This has a dramatic effect on our military readiness. 95% of 18 to 25-year-olds live in an area where legal cannabis is readily available. Will descheduling help this at all? What kind of actions can the executive government, or executive part of the government, do to help curb this? Because this will be an issue. And right now, Putin is across that pond, and he's getting a little testy with Ukraine in that war. What happens if we have to call on arms from several different countries to fight Russia? Would we be able to handle that? Todd?
Is that for me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's up your alley, baby.
Well, yeah, obviously. I mean, I think I'm sorry. I think I discussed this earlier, but it's a massive readiness issue. And I think the way to get to it is to start having the conversation at the military level, right? And looking at cannabis from all of the opportunities that it presents, all the way from industrial hemp to adult use cannabis on a regular basis, without a pop pun, without a giggle, right? And using facts and science and common sense. It's going to take bold, courageous, visionary leadership to help make this transition, right? There's a huge paradigm shift that is taking place with the re-legalization of cannabis. And if you can recognize that and the impacts that it has on fairness and social justice and economics and sustainability, the advances that we're making in the industry and health and wellness, and recognize that that these can be driven in a way that can address a lot of the issues that prohibition created, and they can address a lot of the issues that weren't even created by prohibition, but are just major issues of our time. And I think it's going to take conversation. That's it. Bottom line. My thing is that I don't understand why the FDA and the DEA and the DOJ have so much say about doing research on medical cannabis, right? When we know that the Department of Health and Human Services, on behalf of the FDA, owns patents for cannabinoids to serve as neuroprotectants, anti-inflammatories, antioxidants, and things of this nature, things that could mitigate and treat traumatic brain injury, things that could address all kinds of serious diseases and illnesses, yet we are unable to research that plant. I'm looking for leadership from within the DOD and the VA to look at the DEA and the FDA and say, I'm sorry, you have a patent on this, but we're not researching this. Excuse me, we have 22 people a day who are going to put a pistol in their mouth. Maybe we ought to take a look at this, because people who have served are saying that it's saving their lives and it's changing their lives. Or you look at their spouses and their spouses go, man, cannabis saved my marriage. It was going downhill because my husband was in a bottle every night and would, do certain things and not act like the man or the woman that I married. And we should be looking into this. And I think it just takes some courageous leadership to do things of that nature. So sorry for the tirade, but that's what I think.
Dr. Myers and Shane, what are your thoughts on military readiness and how cannabis descheduling or legalization is going to affect it? Right now, they're at a serious decline.
Well, there's no question, and the real concern is China from the perspective of the military. I think if I want to go back to the first responder side, because I have more context with that, I think we have similar issues, as Todd indicated earlier, in the first responder area. We have huge alcohol issues in our profession, high divorce rates. There's way too much pressure associated with kind of work that we want to do. I enjoyed it every day. It was an honor to do it, but certainly there's times that I, suffered from the work that I did, and to this day. So law enforcement recruiting is down across the country. We're having a huge issue right now with recruiting and retention of law enforcement. A lot of that is because of bad criminal justice public policy that's been forced on folks, where we've had kind of a defund movement that's occurred in law enforcement, and law enforcement officers are saying, I'm done. I can't be associated with this kind of work anymore. But at the same time, there's two things. We have more and more younger people that have lived in states where they've been able to consume medical marijuana that may prohibit them from being law enforcement officers in some areas. That's the first one. The second one is we have too much alcohol. We have too much reliance on alcohol, and there's an opportunity for cannabis to take the place of that. Again, you can have abuses with anything, but we see much more significant problems with alcohol abuse in this country and opioid abuse than anything else that's out there. And all I can tell you from a person that was on the street, I wrestled with drunks all the time. I never wrestle with somebody who is high on grass.
Yeah, I bet you haven't. They're pretty easy to take down if you really had to. We're like, what's going on, man? Why are you doing
Yeah.
this?
I just want to enjoy my night.
That's right. Well, I tell you, this is an interesting topic of conversation because not only do we have, there's several issues of why people aren't ready to be in the military or first responders, right? It could be lack of education. It could be physically in shape. I know that's a big deal right now. There's a lot of people who aren't quite in shape, can't meet the physical standards for the military or police academies, fire department academies. But this also adds another layer of complexity. So the other two layers of complexity is something you can't really do much about. You have to more like learn. It has to be an educator. Everybody has to learn to live healthier, to be healthier in order to solve that problem. With this, this is an issue where you have a conflict between the federal government and all of its dealings with international policies and foreign and in-state policies and federal policies and shipping and sending something from Georgia to Texas or something of that nature. It is all intertwined within that. And it makes it complicated because more and more people are realizing that medical cannabis is a way to take them off what currently they have at 14 pills. They can break down to 4 pills and it's much easier to manage. We're losing soldiers and we're losing men and women from our armed services and our first responders due to a lack of, we're kicking the can down the road. And we've made a problem so complex that it's going to take just as long as it did to get to where we are to fix it, it seems like. I don't know if there's an actual quick fix to it other than Congress and having that going all the way through the full support of Congress and completely having to gut how we deal with cannabis by legislation. Shane, is that going to be even possible?
No, I mean, I do. So I want to answer that question, but I'd also like to comment on the readiness thing. Just
go right ahead, brother. Go right ahead.
So on your first point about Congress, Todd's already made this point. I just want to emphasize that he is in fact correct. I strongly agree. And I'd like to add just, we're on an election day. And my guess is that we're going to see some Republicans, take quite a few seats at the federal level and, we'll see what else happens. But my message to you is, like I said, I have a Texas preacher for a father. Okay. That is the guy you need to convince on this, right? That is the person who isn't convinced, who needs to be convinced. And it's in every state and it's across. That's the vote and the voice of many leaders in communities who are convincible, right? But we're not getting that message to them the right way. We need to get our talking points down for Republicans, and we need to get our talking points down for the religious right and religious left, but mainly it's the religious right. That's the part that we just haven't really gotten the messaging down. I'm telling you, the vets are the key. Once I told my father is convinced now, of course, because I'm incredibly persuasive. So you could just put me next to anybody long enough and they'll break down. But what convinced him, honestly, was when I explained to him, the veteran situation and that these guys have these medical cards their doctors say they should be able to have. If they go to academy, they present that medical card. The federal government says they may not defend themselves in their home with a firearm like you or I can. So they can carry a gun abroad and get shot next to the guy next to them or whatever. They can't come home. And I'm saying guy here, pardon me. And I understand that this is not a guy-girl issue, but I'm just speaking quickly here. This is a problem. It's even a worse problem for a spouse, right? Who's at home with kids, etc. And that's a readiness issue. I know that no one talks about it, but if you want to get down to it, we have police, like we've been talking about first responders, but one point we haven't covered is that we have state militias, right? And the states have passed these laws, but now the federal government says you can't have a weapon if you act on those laws and you have a medical marijuana card. And so the federal government is using this to disarm the states. That is a problem, people. That's a problem. And if you believe in the Second Amendment, and if you're a card-carrying Republican of any stripe, like what's wrong with you, and why aren't these messages being put out there in this way to the Republicans? That needs to be done. And I guess the other part of it that I think we need to get is that we need to be able to make a more sophisticated message to like Black and brown communities. There's a social equity component of this that often is associated with the other side. We need to pair that up with the religious view because there's a religious link there that's a bridge first of all. And second of all, we need to talk about the link between overregulation and violence through confrontation with police. If you have police out there having to wrestle the guy who's high on crass, like you wrestle enough of them, it may not be the guy who's high. It may be the guy who's selling untaxed cigarettes, for example, Eric Garner in New York, right? Who could have a violent confrontation. If we're serious about that issue, then you want to decrease the amount of confrontation you're going to have between these communities and law enforcement, right? And we need to do that. That's a message that we could be harnessing and using. And if we don't do it, if we do not have the talking points in groups like this that are going to work to get our message across, because it is a persuasive and righteous argument, then we are not going to win. And what's happening is people have what they want right now, which is they have their weed, they have their business, they have their license, whatever it is, and they just don't think it's urgent. But I'm telling you, the winter is coming, okay? And it's time to get our ducks in a row. And I think the vets are the key. That's why I'm here talking about it. And I forgot what my other point was. So I'll have mercy on everyone's soul and be quiet now.
Well, hey, I love what you said there, man. Because I when I came into the activist side about 6 or 7 years ago, I said that I'll stop whenever veterans have access to medical cannabis. But now my new mantra is I won't stop until I can smoke weed with a cop. And, I do believe that is where we have to be able to extend a hand on a societal level and educate. And Curry, I know you do a great job of that. But yeah, I think first responders, law enforcement, veterans, this is the community. And you were speaking too about kind of the older generation as well. It's unique because they're the ones who are transitioning over to medical cannabis at a pretty rapid rate on the down low, or within their communities. But when you talk to them, they're like, oh, I would never smoke marijuana, but these gummies, these are amazing. They love a gummy. And because it turns out that the older generation, they could use this, right? Time wounds all heals. And
they vote.
It's important. Mm-hmm.
And the AARP is powerful. And we should be getting that. The point is we have winning arguments, and it's not a political issue. It shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever you are, wherever you are. If you don't believe us, like what's going on, there's a communication breakdown is the only explanation, I think.
So at the end of the day, at the end of this message in our discussion, we've discussed that the Biden pardons haven't really done anything, but it's a good gesture because it shows that they're going in the right direction. Problem with this is we have 18 million veterans in the state, in this great country of ours, right? 7% of our population. If you look at Texas, 5% of all the counties in Texas are veterans. And there's a snapshot of your local population, right? If you take a snapshot of a county here in Texas, you say, hey, who are our veterans? You're going to see they're plumbers, they're police officers, they're businessmen, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're everybody that makes up who your community is. We're just a snapshot of your community. And 18 million veterans who are getting addicted to opioids, who are getting angry all the time, who are losing who they are mentally because they're so medicated. And I get that some of these guys are brash. I know, I served with them. I understand. I get how they are. But there's something about vets that they all, when we see each other, when we're around each other, we're always there for each other. We're there to help our community. We love to give to our community. Making sure that these veterans are healthy, making sure that the community in which they live in is healthy is key and paramount to us as a nation becoming a much better nation down the road. And what we're not seeing is that we're all I hear and see is from the political spectrum, them listening to us and nodding their heads and then turning around and going into their buildings and not doing anything about it. And I really saw it, and this is both on the left and the right. I mean, when the PAC Act came across and those guys had to go stand fire watch, that was infuriated. I remember calling Todd talking about how mad I was that you played politics with these dudes that you sent to a war that we didn't even need to go to. And then when you come back, you're playing politics with their lives. And it's not, we got to stop doing that. We have to stop putting ourselves in saying that, listen, I got to play these politics to win my votes to get where my party can be empowered to do the right thing. This is a catastrophe for the people. It's not right for either side to be doing this, and we need to be better than this, and we can be better than this. And I think you're right, Shane. We need to work hard on finding good talking points. We need to get this in front of the people that make the decisions. I appreciate everybody coming on here. Anybody want to have a last minute to speak your mind about the topic and how it's going to be Congress, and just get something to come out of this. It's going to be Congress that's going to really push this thing forward. It won't be the executive branch. I think people think the executive branch is, but I think after we've listened to this conversation, that does not seem to be the best answer. I think the best answer might be getting this through Congress as quickly as possible. Shane, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And the only other thing that I have to say is I've been really impressed. I'm on a lot of panels, a lot of talks with a lot of folks. And, just my fellow panelists here, I think you guys are very well spoken. You've got exactly the right way to communicate these messages. Same thing to you, Robert. Like, I really do believe things like this is not the kind of thing that you can have a, however many character tweet and get the message, right? This is something that's gonna require education, like you said, and folks like the ones on this call are the people we need out there in front of Congress and in our communities, spreading the message and persuading their neighbors.
I appreciate it. Dr. Myers, anything? Or Shane, or Todd, either one.
Go ahead, Dr. Myers. Okay. I would say thanks, Shane. That's really kind of you to say that regarding the presentation. And I think the platform is unique. I think it's worth mentioning, Robert, that Hemp for Victory is a 501c3, and we are trying to host these conversations both either virtually, where we can bring in expertise from all over the country and around the world, and physically, wherever that may be, wherever military leadership and cannabis expertise can intersect to educate and inform, I think it is a good thing, right? We're trying to host in-person events whenever we can, but we recognize that this one here, and I think we'll be doing this on a more regular basis, are going to be very important. So, but I think this is a huge opportunity. I would hope that everyone kind of takes that in terms of like a way of delivering the message to share with others that, we got to stop looking at this as the problem of cannabis, but look at this as the opportunity of cannabis to address so many issues that have befallen our society today. Not the least of which is opioid overdoses and suicides among our veteran population. So I'm certainly grateful for being here. Thank you for putting it together, Robert.
You bet. Dr. Myers.
Same, Todd, Shane, thank you so much. Robert, appreciate the invitation and being on. I truly believe that our founding fathers got it correct in the formation of the country, and that is the principles of federalism, that we turn these certain things like this over to states and allow them to develop the best philosophy that works for them locally and at the state level. And I do think as an industry, we need to focus on the continual research and medical efficacy of cannabis. I think that's the winning solution to changing hearts and minds, is that we show the fact that if you can have access to this, it could make your life better, and not focus on just complete decrim or recreational. I know that happens, but I think the vast majority of folks in the United States understand that medical cannabis should be allowed.
Yep. Well, I'd like to thank all of you guys for being on this call, especially on this discussion. Todd's the one he and I got to put together that Hemp for Victory party last year, and it really kind of spurned something in both of us to develop Hemp for Victory as a 501c3. This is what we do. We create conversations like this that are very detailed, that are specific to how cannabis is affecting the veteran community in a positive way. We also want to know that when we do these types of things, we do some research ahead of time. We want to make sure that we know who we're bringing in and who we're talking to. We want to see publications and things of that nature so that we have the respect of the other side's opinion. And we also respect those who are coming on here. So I would like to say once again, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I really do appreciate it. You are my subject matter experts, and my subject matter expert list is starting to fill up quite a bit. I'm gonna have to figure out a way. My wife's gonna have to make a spreadsheet for me to figure out a way to keep you guys in order, because I'm gonna call on you again when we do this. So those are people out there who are listening. If this is something that you're interested in and you like these kind of conversations, contact me. Sponsorships are always supported here, corporate sponsorships especially, so that we can get out and have these discussions all over the place. It's what we do. It's what we're good at. All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thanks.